Chapter 57 of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Harris. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 57. Lorna Knows Her Nurse. Having obtained from Benita Odom a very close and full description of the place where her poor mistress lay, and the marks whereby to know it, I hastened to watch it the following morning, before the sun was up or any people were about. And so, without interruption, I was in the churchyard at sunrise. In the farthest and darkest nook, overgrown with grass, and overhung by a weeping tree, a little bank of earth betokened the rounding off of a hapless life. There was nothing to tell of rank or wealth, of love or even pity. Nameless as a peasant lay the last, as supposed, of a mighty race. Only some unskilful hand, probably Master Odom's under his wife's teaching, had carved a rude L and a ruder D upon a large pebble from the beach, and set it up as a headstone. I gathered a little grass for Lorna and a sprig of the weeping tree, and then returned to the Forest Cat, as Benita's lonely inn was called. For the way is long from Watchet to Oare, and though you may ride it rapidly, as the Doones had done on that fatal night, to travel on wheels, with one horse only, is a matter of time and of prudence. Therefore we set out pretty early, 3 of us and a baby, who could not well be left behind. The wife of the man who owned the cart had undertaken to mind the business, and the other babies, upon condition of having the keys of all the taps left with her. As the manner of journeying over the moor has been described oft enough already, I will say no more, except that we all arrived before dusk of the summer's day, safe at Plover's Barrows. Mistress Benita was delighted with the change from her dull hard life, and she made many excellent observations, such as seem natural to a foreigner looking at our country. As luck would have it, the first who came to meet us at the gate was Lorna, with nothing whatever upon her head, the weather being summerly, but her beautiful hair shed round her, and wearing a sweet white frock tucked in, and showing her figure perfectly. In her joy she ran straight up to the cart, and then stopped and gazed at Benita. At one glance her old nurse knew her. "Oh, the eyes, the eyes!" she cried, and was over the rail of the cart in a moment, in spite of all her substance. Lorna, on the other hand, looked at her with some doubt and wonder, as though having right to know much about her, and yet unable to do so. But when the foreign woman said something in Roman language, and flung new hay from the cart upon her, as if in a romp of childhood, the young maid cried, "Oh, Nita, Nita!" and fell upon her breast and wept, and after that looked round at us. This being so, there could be no doubt as to the power of proving Lady Lorna's birth and rights, both by evidence and token. For though we had not the necklace now, thanks to Annie's wisdom, we had the ring of heavy gold, a very ancient relic, with which my maid, in her simple way, had pledged herself to me. And Benita knew this ring as well as she knew her own fingers, having heard a long history about it, and the effigy on it of the wild cat was the bearing of the house of Lorne. For though Lorna's father was a nobleman of high and goodly lineage, her mother was of yet more ancient and renowned descent, being the last in line direct from the great and kingly chiefs of Lorne. A wild and headstrong race they were, and must have everything their own way. Hot blood was ever among them, even of one household, and their sovereignty, which more than once had defied the King of Scotland, waned and fell among themselves by continual quarrelling. And it was of a piece with this that the Doones, who were an offset, by the mother's side, holding in co-partnership some large property, which had come by the spindle, as we say, should fall out with the Earl of Lorne, the last but one of that title. The daughter of this nobleman had married Sir Ensor Doone, but this, instead of healing matters, led to fiercer conflict. I never could quite understand all the ins and outs of it, which none but a lawyer may go through and keep his head at the end of it. The motives of mankind are plainer than the motions they produce. Especially when charity, such as found among us, sits to judge the former, and is never weary of it, while reason does not care to trace the latter complications, except for fee or title. Therefore it is enough to say, that knowing Lorna to be direct in heirship to vast property, and bearing especial spite against the house of which she was the last, the Doones had brought her up with full intention of lawful marriage, and had carefully secluded her from the wildest of their young gallants. Of course, if they had been next in succession, the child would have gone down the waterfall, to save any further trouble. But there was an intercepting branch of some honest family, and they being outlaws would have a poor chance (though the law loves outlaws) against them. Only Lorna was of the stock, and Lorna they must marry. And what a triumph against the old Earl, for a cursed Doone to succeed him! As for their outlawry, great robberies, and grand murders, the veriest child, nowadays, must know that money heals the whole of that. Even if they had murdered people of a good position, it would only cost about twice as much to prove their motives loyal. But they had never slain any man above the rank of yeoman, and folk even said that my father was the highest of their victims, for the death of Lorna's mother and brother was never set to their account. Pure pleasure it is to any man to reflect upon all these things. How truly we discern clear justice, and how well we deal it. If any poor man steals a sheep, having 10 children starving, and regarding it as mountain game, as a rich man does a hare, to the gallows with him. If a man of rank beats down a door, smites the owner upon the head, and honours the wife with attention, it is a thing to be grateful for, and to slouch smitten head the lower. While we were full of these things, and wondering what would happen next, or what we ought ourselves to do, another very important matter called for our attention. This was no less than Annie's marriage to the Squire Faggus. We had tried to put it off again, for in spite of all advantages, neither my mother nor myself had any real heart for it. Not that we dwelled upon Tom's shortcomings, or rather perhaps his going too far, at the time when he worked the road so. All that was covered by the King's pardon, and universal respect of the neighbourhood. But our scruple was this, and the more we talked the more it grew upon us, that we both had great misgivings as to his future steadiness. For it would be 1,000 pities, we said, for a fine, well-grown, and pretty maiden, such as our Annie was, useful too in so many ways, and lively and warm-hearted, and mistress of £500, to throw herself away on a man with a kind of a turn for drinking. If that last were even hinted, Annie would be most indignant, and ask, with cheeks as red as roses, who had ever seen Master Faggus any the worse for liquor indeed. Her own opinion was, in truth, that he took a great deal too little, after all his hard work and hard riding, and coming over the hills to be insulted. And if ever it lay in her power, and with no one to grudge him his trumpery glass, she would see that poor Tom had the nourishment which his cough and his lungs required. His lungs being quite as sound as mine, this matter was out of all argument. So mother and I looked at one another, as much as to say, let her go upstairs, she will cry and come down more reasonable. And while she was gone, we used to say the same thing over and over again, but without perceiving a cure for it. And we almost always finished up with the following reflection, which sometimes came from mother's lips and sometimes from my own. Well, well, there is no telling. None can say how a man may alter when he takes to matrimony. But if we could only make Annie promise to be a little firm with him. I fear that all this talk on our part only hurried matters forward, Annie being more determined every time we pitied her. And at last Tom Faggus came, and spoke as if he were on the King's road, with a pistol at my head and one at mother's. "No more fast and loose," he cried, "either one thing or the other. I love the maid, and she loves me, and we will have one another, either with your leave or without it. How many more times am I to dance over these vile hills, and leave my business, and get nothing more than a sigh or a kiss, and "Tom, I must wait for mother."